back to NostalgiaCast. I'm Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lundberg.
And today's episode, we're going to be talking about The Truman Show, a 1998 film directed by Peter Weir and starring Jim Carrey. But before we do that, let's do a quick recap of our last episode, Darin, which was Speed.
Yep.
We had a guest on, Jackson joined us, and he chose Speed. And I thought we had a really good time talking about that movie because that was big for both you and I that summer. And so it was fun to revisit that one. What do you think about that?
Yeah, Jackson, I don't think he mentioned it during the episode, but he's a good friend on Twitter, but I don't think he mentioned that's his favorite action movie. And so I think we did it all. We had our nitpicks with it, obviously. If you want to hear what those nitpicks were, please feel free to listen to the episode, wherever your podcatchers are sold, I guess you could say. But, even though there are little nitpicks with like the filmmaking, I just think the more that I think about that movie, and especially watching the trailer and stuff like that, it's so expertly paced. It's such a cool, I remember that being such a cool experience and just being taken along for that ride. And just out of all the Die Hard clones, that's the one that just has its own identity. And it's because of that pacing. And one of the main things we did talk about was how direction is about more than just avoiding flubs and plot holes. It's about the sheer like driving force of a movie and making sure that everything, even though it has those three acts, it's very propulsive and it just works so well. It's such a good movie, and it's just a testament to why it stands up today, and it's still it gets your adrenaline pumping.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know you and I talked about it for a long time afterwards, and it was also fun to watch Jan de Bont make the leap from cinematographer to director.
Yeah.
So that was always cool too. So that was Speed. We had a good time with that one. So check it out if you want to. Let's go ahead and get into The Truman Show. But before we do, let's go ahead and watch the trailer.
Okay.
30 years ago, the Omnicam Corporation created the ultimate reality-based television experience, The Truman Show. Beginning with a child's birth, they set out to document an entire human life, every single moment broadcast live to the world. They created his hometown of Sea Haven, all of it completely enclosed within the dome of the Truman stage.
Cue the sign.
And even though The Truman Show has become an international phenomenon, Truman himself has never learned the true nature of the world around him.
Truman! It's television! Yes!
Despite some close calls. Every aspect of his life has been carefully scripted and meticulously crafted. But the one thing no one could predict was who Truman Burbank would grow up to be.
Good morning!
Morning!
Oh, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
I hereby proclaim this planet Trumania of the Burbank Galaxy. Trumania, Trumania, I love and honor you.
Okay, The Truman Show, 1998, movie directed by Peter Weir, director who did movies like Witness, Mosquito Coast, Fearless, Dead Poet Society. Yeah. He also did Master and Commander, Far Side of the World, and the newest one he did was like the Way Back, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Also, I think he did Gallipoli and Hanging Rock. Is that right?
Right. That's probably my favorite of the Peter Weir movies. That's a great one. Yeah, he's just a lot of bangers, right?
Yeah, it seems like he might be retired now. It's not official. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, he's kind of evening out. He's not had his output isn't quite as strong as it once was, and with the filmography that strong, I don't really have a problem with it.
Yeah, definitely good director. This movie obviously stars Jim Carrey. Laura Linney's in there. Ed Harris as Christoph, and then you got Paul Giamatti. Noah Emmerich also shows up. Mm-hmm. Anybody else worth mentioning?
Philip Baker Hall. I know I kind of had a shout out to him. So, yeah.
Yeah. All-star cast. So that should be fun to talk about this. Now, Darin, I picked it obviously because it had a very profound impact on me. Also, it being a 90s movie, we had to pick it because, it was really popular when it came out. I remember when it did come out, I wasn't able to see it right away. And so, but I heard all the buzz, and so it was like something that I was really excited to see because I'd heard so much good things about it. And then when I finally got a chance to see it, I saw it at your house. In fact, I think you invited me over to watch it, and I was just blown away by what I was seeing. I remember just like being stuck to the screen. I don't think I moved for the whole time it was there. And the thing I remember most, I want to say this, is that I wanted the movie to keep going. I didn't want it to end when it ended. I remember being like upset that it was over. I was like, that was so much fun. I had such a good time watching that movie and experiencing what I was experiencing. That it ended, I was kind of like, no, don't end. Like, keep going. You know what I mean? Like, what's next? But we'll talk about why it ends the way it ends. But anyway, I love this movie. I definitely had to make sure we talked about it during our 90s Palooza. One of Jim Carrey's best, and we'll talk about Jim Carrey as well. But before we do, tell me your history with it and what your experience was like the first time you saw it.
Okay, well, I was talking about it with my wife. She saw this at a drive-through, I think, with a double showing with Deep Impact. She saw it the night before we actually met on our blind date. But I remember talking with her, even though we didn't know each other. We kind of had the same reaction. I remember seeing the trailer for the Truman Show and just kind of rolling my eyes. I think by this time, Jim Carrey had just been like the goofy guy, right? He had Ace Ventura, he had The Mask, he had That Man Forever, obviously. I think Liar Liar came out the year before this, and so he made a name for himself, but he was like the goofy comedy guy, like the rubber face, right? So when the Truman Show came out, it was like, oh, another one of these. It's going to be another one of these goofball things. And so I remember watching that trailer and going, I don't want to see that. Like, I think I'm Jim Carreyed out, right? And then I don't know why I ended up seeing it. Like, I was there, I think, opening weekend. I think during the 90s, we saw a lot of things opening weekend. And it's just, and my wife had the same reaction. The movie plays and it's like, this is really smart. Like, this isn't the typical Jim Carrey movie. You know, I think this is the movie that he wanted to be taken seriously as a dramatic actor, even though there's still a lot of comedy in this because it's his patented trademark stuff. But he's got a very smart dramatic performance. We'll obviously go into that a little bit more, but the movie itself is so smart. And you could tell it had something on its mind, like it was making a statement. And what's interesting, and I think this is what makes movies masterpieces, is that they grow over time and they gain more meaning. It's like a snowball. Like, the older they get, the more prophetic they are, the more meaningful they are. And so just with the reality TV boom that came out after this, or I wouldn't say it was a response to this movie. I think Truman Show just kind of, because Andrew Niccol, the screenwriter, he was credited with writing the first draft in 1991, which predates The Real World on MTV, which is, I think, the first, other than Candid Camera, maybe, like the first reality TV type show. And so I think they just recognized Andrew Niccol. I think he wrote, and his script was originally like a thriller. It's funny with like Good Will Hunting, how Ben Affleck and Matt Damon wrote that movie as like a thriller. And then they dialed it back and they were able to make it a drama, and that it works beautifully. It's the same thing here. Like, he starts out, I think he called it the Malcolm Show, and it was much darker. I think it ended with the Malcolm character strangling the Kristoff character on the roof of the studio, something like that. But when Peter Weir got attached, he made it more comedic, and obviously he wanted Jim Carrey as his, because he liked the plasticity of him in Ace Ventura, like the performance that he put on. But just the way that it predated that reality show boom, before we started getting so obsessed with these celebrities and their lives, you know, the fake celebrities or whatever. It kind of tapped that zeitgeist before that zeitgeist took hold of the planet, you know what I mean? And so that's what I mean. Like, you could tell, like, watching that movie the first time, this was smart. This has something on its mind. And watching it now, especially watching it last night, I was like, this is even better today than it was back when we saw it in 98. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of my hit. It just kind of blindsided you. And that's where you started taking Jim Carrey seriously. There's a moment that we'll talk about where it's like, holy cow, like, he can act. He's not just about the rubber faces. And so, you know, with that and with the smartness of the movie and all the statements that it was making, I just think it was, wow. It sometimes a movie comes out and it just predates these, like, the pop culture, like, phenomenons, and kind of, you know what I mean? And so it's just, it's amazing that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was very original. I think I really appreciated the way they filmed everything. I loved
Yeah.
watching the camera angles, and like knowing that some of the buttons on their shirts were cameras, or the radio in the car was a camera. You know, just how many cameras there were in the dome on the set.
Yeah.
Um, that was fun to kind of like watch it as like, you know, being wanting to be a filmmaker and wanting to go out and do that for a living. It was like, this is unique and this is special, and they're doing something that I would like to do, you know. So it was fun to watch it, looking at it through that perspective.
Yeah.
So you said you had some trivia you wanted to go over real quick before we really dive into it. What was
Well,
some
that
of the trivia?
was yeah, that was some of it. You know, it started off as a thriller. I think that's just really funny, and just the way that they, I don't know, like if they were to do it as a drama, I don't know if it would have worked as well. There's a comedy to it that kind of you're able to see it more clearly, I guess you could say. But this is not like the first time, like other trivia's like this is not the first time that this kind of idea was tackled. I know it was tackled in a Twilight Zone episode from 1989. I think it was called Special Service. There's a Robert A. Heinlein story called They, which kind of has people that are hired to make this guy, the main character, feel like he's insane. There's a Philip K. Dick novel that was written in 1959 called Time Out of Joint that has the kind of the same ideals. And then also this movie, to get philosophical a little bit, this is like a play on Plato's Cave, which was an allegory of these men that were trapped in an underground bunker, so to speak, and they're all kind of chained together. And their whole existence is they just see the shadows of certain things that they're illuminated by a firelight in the cellar or the cave where they're kind of chained up and imprisoned. And then what happens when they are brought into the sunlight? So they're seeing everything from a different perspective. They're getting like shadows of different things illuminated by firelight. But then when they're brought into the real world, they see real things instead of just the shadows or representations of them. They're actually seeing the actual physical things that they're used to. And so would that blow your mind, like kind of stepping into reality, that kind of thing? So it's a play on that allegory. I think it's really interesting. And it's what's great about this movie, like how it predates like Big Brother or The Apprentice or The Real Housewives or Survivor, I think hit big in 2000, 2 years after this. So it critiques all those things. It's a critique of like privacy. It's a critique of surveillance. It's a critique of like psychoanalytics, like how you view yourself and everything. It's just there's so much going on in this movie, and I think that other than the surface of it, like I said, it being a comedy, it kind of makes it fun to watch, like you were talking about. But then, like all masterpieces, there's something underneath it, not just one thing. There's many things that kind of feed into this movie, and we could have conversation after conversation from different viewpoints of what this movie represents. Mainly though, I think it's that critique about media and stuff like that. So that's just kind of all these interesting ideas, and how I think Weir wasn't even the first choice. Brian De Palma was going to direct this at first, which would have been really interesting. And then when he
Yeah.
dropped out, Tim Burton was thought about. Terry Gilliam was thought about.
Okay.
Steven Spielberg was thought about. All these thinkers that would have done a good job with it. I just think Weir, because the movies we talked about, like I said, Picnic at Hanging Rock is this very like haunting. It's a mystery about these girls that disappear on this island, but it's not about where they went or solving it. It's just kind of a dreamy kind of hint of the sexuality going on or some awkward stuff. Did the island swallow them up? Is it like, and so with his other movies too, like Fearless that comes out, Dead Poet Society that came out, The Last Wave that came out, Mosquito Coast, Witness,
Right.
like we said, even Master and Commander, even something like Green Card, which is at its heart a romantic comedy, is still very interesting from the perspective of how the Depardieu and the McDowell characters kind of like interact and fall in love with each.
I
So
remember not liking Green Card. I didn't like
yeah,
Green Card.
well,
But
it's on the surface, it's just very light, but like I said, there's more interesting stuff going on if you look for it. It's just
okay.
Peter Weir is not a boring director. He's always got something on his mind, and so when he comes out and he makes a movie, it's like whoa, like you pay attention. And so that's kind of why I'm sad, like he's still not making movies. But like I said, with all these classics that he's got under his belt, it's like yeah, he's definitely a director that's worth a place in history. So those are just like a little bit of more interesting tidbits just feeding into the movie itself.
Yeah, well, you definitely can tell that a lot of thought went into this, and a
Mhm.
lot of, like, research and a lot of planning, and the director obviously had a vision, because it's a unique piece of art, and it's interesting to look at. It's never dull. There's always something that you could learn from next viewing, and so you can tell a lot of preparation went into it, a lot of effort and energy went into this project, and it shows, because what you see on screen is obviously a reflection of that. You mentioned about imagining yourself in Truman's uh, place, and that's something that while I was watching it for the first time, I kept doing, and I kept imagining what would happen to me if I was in Truman's place, and it was happening to me, and it was like, I don't know how I'd react to that, like figuring out that your whole life is a lie, and everything was manufactured and controlled your whole life, and you really didn't have a
Yeah,
say in anything. You make decisions, but you didn't have a real clear choice
right.
on anything. So I kept thinking, gosh, that would be, how would that be when you realize that? And to watch Jim Carrey like portray that when he finally does realize it's so well done. And it's like, and you feel for him the whole time, you're rooting for him, you want him to succeed.
Yeah.
And it's just a fun journey. It's a fun movie. Like I say, it's didactic. It has those meanings. It's obviously there. There's always the never give up on your dream theme. There's the love conquers all. Even when he does everything for Sylvia, right? Sylvia, or is it?
Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
what's funny, right? Like she plays Lauren on the show, but her real name is Sylvia. And when I was writing my notes, I had a hard like, is it Lauren or it's Sylvia? Like every time I
yeah,
had to back check myself. So that's
yeah.
again interesting reality versus fiction type.
Right. I mean, it's well thought out, very well
Yeah,
done. It's such a fun movie to watch. We showed it to our kids; they loved it. They love Jim Carrey, so I knew they'd like it. And it's pretty harmless. You can show it to your kids and not feel like there's anything you got to censor or anything. So that's always fun too.
right.
Um, but I want to talk about Peter Weir. We kind of started talking about him, but we mentioned movies he made like Dead Poets and Witness and Fearless. I think he's a great director.
Great director. Yeah.
And like I mentioned before, I heard he's thinking about retiring, or maybe he has retired. But it'd be nice if he came out of retirement and made a few more of these kind of movies, because they're so interesting and they're so well put together that he's someone that I'd like to see continue to make films.
And he's got something to say. That's
Yeah,
the great thing. Like every time he comes, because here's the thing, like the we talked about like Deep Impact and then Armageddon came out at the same time, right? You had two Wyatt Earps that came out. There was also another movie called Ed TV, directed by Ron Howard, that came out
yeah. Didn't
about
that
this
come
same
later?
time.
That came later, right?
Yeah, I think same year or year after, something like that,
Oh,
but they were in production on the same time. But if you watch these two movies back to back, I know we've ragged on Ron Howard before, but they're night and day. Like you could tell there's an art to this movie, like the cinematography by Peter Bizu. I hope I'm getting his name right, but the way that you could tell, like there's Irish shots, the way you can tell there's like shots that move, and they're not very static, and they're jerky a little bit. When you talk about it being interesting to look at, I think it's interesting because it's so boring. Like it's shot like a TV show, right? Like all TV shows, reality shows are shot, except it's artistic the way that it's boring. Does that make sense? It's so weird because
yeah,
you're watching it and it's like, well, this is what all reality TV is, but because it's a movie, you're noticing the little irises, you're noticing the fishbowl lens stuff, you're noticing the extreme close-ups with the wide angles or stuff like that, or and it's just it's artistic in its dullness because it's trying to mimic that real life. And you watch Ed TV and it just, Truman Show makes its points with like precision and subtlety and with like subtext that turns into text on a dime and stuff like that. It's very masterful from a storytelling and a filmmaking point of view. And then you watch something like Ed, and it's just very clunky and it's in your face, and all the points that it makes are obvious. And so it's just weird watching these two movies back to back and saying, well, Ed TV is like, you're not going to take this seriously, and it's not going to last because it's art making points that have already been made, and
right.
better than was
Yeah,
made. So just
yeah.
interesting.
um, I know we're not going to talk about this for our outro topic, but what is your favorite Peter Weir movie? Is Truman Show your favorite?
No, I mentioned that Picnic at Hanging Rock is my
Oh,
favorite.
that's right. That's right. That's
Just
right.
just because it is so there's just a feel to it. Like I don't know, it's like it puts you under a spell. And I know a lot of people try to watch it thinking that it's a mystery that needs to be solved, but that's not what it is. It's about like the texture of the time that those girls lived in, and the pre-colonial stuff, and the sexuality that it's never spoken of, but it's more hinted at with visuals and things like that. It's just a haunting piece of work. But Master and Commander is such a strong, you feel like you're living in that time, you know what I mean? And Fearless is one of those movies with Jeff Bridges, who we talked about with Big Lebowski, where he survives a plane crash, stuff like that. It's kind of an he's dealing with all these things, and at the very end, where he just feels like he's got like he can't be damaged or he can't be killed, and then he has like, I think, a peanut allergy, and he eats some peanuts, and he has an attack, and at the end his last line is "I'm alive," and it's so powerful how it sneaks up on you and all this stuff. Even I think Dead Poet Society too is like one of those movies like Pulp Fiction, where it comes out and all of a sudden all these other movies, because I think we talked about it with Swing Kids, right, where all these other movies start trying to copy that that feel or that tone or that story and things like that. And Witness is just out of all the movies that Harrison Ford starred in, I think that might be his best performance, and that's all because of Peter Weir. You know what I mean?
I really enjoy Witness. I also really enjoyed Mosquito Coast. That's my mom showed it to me when I was really young, and I loved that movie. I was really enthralled by that. But Fearless is great. I wasn't a big fan of Master and Commando. I just thought it was kind of boring. Like I mean, that's not well put together and not well done. For some reason, it just did not engage me like I wanted it to. And I haven't seen The Way Back, so I don't really know what to say about that one. But
okay, I'm sure. Well, Well, I think Way Back only has like a 74% run, so not everybody like really loved it. But I know what you're saying about Master and Commander. It's so, because it drops you right into that world, and it literally feels like you're living that time, and all the like the stuff is it's you feel like you're at sea, and it's going on for so long. And so what I like about that movie, even though I agree with you, it can be from a narrative, or maybe it could be looked at as boring, but I just think it envelops you and you feel like you're there. And so I think filmmaking wise, I just think it's a very strong movie. But even like I said, Green Card has some textures that are interesting, even though it's not quite as deep as the rest of his movies. But we need more directors like Peter Weir that actually have something to say and make statements and have ideas.
Like I said, I wish he would come out of retirement and keep making movies. Right. So definitely a great director. Right. So we haven't really dove deep into Jim Carrey's career yet this season.
This season, you know what? We mentioned on the last episode that I was like, have we talked about Jim Carrey? And we did. We had the How the Grinch Stole Christmas episode.
Oh.
Where we talked about him in depth, like from his performance stuff. You know what I mean?
Okay, well, that was last season, though.
Yeah, so it doesn't really count for this, but we have talked about Jim Carrey, but not. I don't even think we mentioned the Truman Show or Man in the Moon or Eternal Sunshine during that episode. So.
Well, yeah. Well, you were right. Like, this was the first movie that we kind of like perked up and thought, oh my gosh, he really can act. This is something different than what we're used to. The Ace Venturas, the Dumb and Dumbers, and the Mask and the Liars, all that stuff that we're kind of got used to seeing Jim Carrey do, the overacting and the crazy face making stuff that he does. But this one, even though he does some of that in this movie, it's tapered back. It's not quite as in your face. It's more subtle. And we kind of realized, wow, there's some really nice things that he's doing with his subtext there, and he's actually a really good actor. And there's just some moments in Truman Show that I don't care how many times I've seen this movie or those scenes, they always make me laugh. And even though I know it's coming, it'll make me laugh every time. The scene where he's in the car telling his wife about the people on the loop, the girl with the flowers, the guy on the bike, or whatever. Right. The girl on the bike, got the flowers, and the den of beetle. During that scene, no matter how many times I've seen it, I always laugh at it. It's so funny, and it's so well timed. Like, just moments of that throughout the whole movie just keep me engaged and keep me kind of, enjoying what I'm watching. So I really appreciate his performance for that reason, or those reasons.
Yeah, well, watching it again last night, I know we were impressed, and I want to get to the specific moment where I realized he was a great actor. But there are times in this movie, I mean, he's great, but he hasn't quite mastered that yet. You could tell there are points where he's trying a little too hard. And I think sometimes the Jim Carreyisms are unmotivated, like especially when his butt is right in the camera, or he's freaking out in the car and stuff like that. Just sometimes you could tell that he's relying a little too heavily on his shtick, if that makes
Okay.
some sense. But so it's still a strong performance. I don't want to kind of minimize that at all. I just think there are moments where you could tell that he's acting. And again, like that comedy stuff, that's what made us like him in the first place, right? I remember him from In Living Color. I remember him playing Vera
Fire
de
Marshal
Milo.
Bill. Yeah.
Fire Marshal Bill, right? I remember outtakes because there was a character Damon Wayans played. He was like a homeless man, right? And there was this joke where he would always pull out, he'd pull out this this pickle jar that was like his toilet, right? And that was the joke. And there's an outtake where Jim Carrey's like trying to gross him out, and he opens up the jar and starts eating one of the pickles on camera. And Damon Wayans is just dying, just because they're just trying to one up each other. So I remember all that. And then when he jumped to Ace Ventura, which was not a great movie, but and I know we talked about him during our Batman episode, because the Jack Nicholson performance in that one is basically Ace Ventura. Like it's the same kind of performance. But what's great about Ace Ventura is Jim Carrey recognized that the script that he wanted a big hit. It didn't go anywhere, so he rewrote it, and that's the 250%. And so he's the whole show of that movie, right? And then he did The Mask, which again, I like when Chuck Russell talks about directing. It's like, we didn't have to rely too much on special effects because Jim Carrey is already a cartoon, right? And so he has those moments, but he also has moments with Cameron Diaz where he's very sincere, and you're like, hold on, like there's something else going on with you. You're more than just this rubbery faced guy, even though was kind of his bread and butter. And so Batman Forever obviously was big for us. Even though I don't know if I like his energy is just great in that movie. Like he kind of brings life to it. Without Jim Carrey in it, like as the rising star, I don't think Batman Forever would have been as popular as it was. And then obviously Liar Liar, which has that comedy stuff, but it also has some really funny moments where he's beating himself up in the bathroom. And the part that kills me is when he goes back out, and since he can't lie, like the judge says, we can have a recess, are you okay to continue? And he can't lie, so he says yes, and they keep going. It's so funny. And so even though he's the goofball, there are these underlying like brilliant moments. Like I did laugh at the part of the car, but the part I really laughed at this time was when he's talking about all of a sudden all the cars jump in front of him and he's yelling about it. And Meryl goes, "You're blaming me for the traffic?" And he goes, "Should I?" And they look at each other. I thought that was really funny. And so, so like I said, there are those moments where I think he's trying a little bit too hard, maybe. But then you get the part in the boat, just to jump to the end, and he's like, "You're gonna have to kill me," he's yelling it. And so that was like, whoa, what's going on? Like that's the moment I think where I don't think he's trying too hard. I think he really nails that moment. But I don't know if you felt the same way. The moment where I started crying in the theater because it was so like, wow, like, whoa, I didn't expect him to do this, have this effect on me, is when the bowsprit like runs through the wall of the dome, right? And he's gone through all this journey and he's overcome his fear of the water. And it's just the music swells and he's just banging on that wall and he's just screaming, and it's just silent, but you can just see on his face like the desperation. And it's so crushing, that moment, because he's gone this far and there's no further he can go. He's like at the end of his adventure, right? And so that moment would not work without Jim Carrey's performance. I think he just nails that moment. And that was the moment that I thought, this guy is a great actor, not just a great comedic actor. He's a great actor. I don't know if you felt that same way.
Well, I mean, I definitely appreciate his performance for sure. But I had similar experiences that you did, where I was kind of tired of the Jim Carrey shtick, and I was getting tired of the Ace Venturas and the Dumb and Dumber characters. Even though I find those entertaining and they are funny, it's just kind of like it was like, okay, what else can you do?
Yeah.
And so they did like a string of dramas. Like he did Truman Show, he did The Majestic, I think it's called, right?
Yeah. Man on the Moon, right?
Yeah, Man on the Moon and Eternal Sunshine. He started doing movies like that, and it was kind of like you started to see his range, that he actually really could do, drama as well as comedy. And so, he's an all around good actor. He's definitely got some talent. And I think, what's the story where he did his first audition for like a junior high school play or something? He was maybe like 12 or 13, and he did some audition, and the director was like, "Hold on a minute there," and he's like, "You're pretty good," and he was like, "Well, I have an agent." So he's like, he really had an agent at a really young age. And so he definitely had plans. And then didn't he write himself a check for like $20 million, like way before he became real successful? as kind of like a promissory note, like eventually I will earn a check for $20 million, and then it came to fruition. So
Yeah, so he cashed it. Yep.
yeah, yeah. So that's pretty cool. Pretty cool stories there. Anything else about Jim Carrey you want to talk about?
No, I mean he's great. This might not be my all-time favorite performance, but like I said, this is the one where I realized he was more than what we were.
Yeah, this was the turning point where he started to kind of show versatility. So
yeah, absolutely right. So what about the other actors?
yeah, well, obviously Ed Harris is great. He's Ed Harris. You can't go wrong with Ed Harris in your movie.
No.
Yeah, Ed Harris as Kristoff. I mean, yeah, like I say, I'm a big Ed Harris fan. Not much I can say negative about his performance, but I do at the end when he starts like almost hurt, Truman, that you start to get a little angry at that character. Like, come on, you feel it. You feel the other characters on the set also getting kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? He might kill this guy if he keeps going the way he's going. And so there's that moment, and then there's that moment when he's talking to him at the very end before he walks up the stage door. Yeah, Ed Harris, he's just phenomenal.
Well, what I loved about, and I love how pretentious he plays Kristoff. Just the way that he talks. It's not like he's like very like sure of himself, and just I think the backstory, because Weir gave all the actors either permission or gave them their actual backstories, and I think Kristoff's backstory is that he won an Oscar for a documentary on homeless people. And he started gave him the idea for the Truman Show. And it was originally going to be called just Bringing Up Baby, I think was the original name of the series. And it was only going to be for one season, like seeing how it would be like with a baby that was born in captivity and then raised by just a mom, a very small set, very small cast, things like that. And then because it became more popular, it was renewed for a second season and kind of evolved into this thing. But you could tell because of the success that it's getting to his head. Especially during the interview with Harry Shearer's character, the reporter, he's just got a pretentiousness, the way that he's talking, just very slow, like we are the product of our reality. It's like, whoa, he's nailing the pretentiousness. He's playing a character, and I thought that was great. And you're right, to the point where he's kind of funny, and you're kind of laughing at him because he's such a pretentious douchebag, so to speak. But when he's literally trying to kill Truman, you're like, how far is he going to take this?
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So it's such a layered. Ed Harris always gives layered performances. I love him.
yeah. And then Laura Linney, I think she deserves a shout out. I remember not really liking that character in the beginning when I first saw this movie. I thought I didn't like just the way she played it, and it was almost like you could tell that she was just fake. She wasn't really she didn't really care about Truman.
Right.
And so for that reason, I didn't really like her. But the more I watched the movie, the more I started to appreciate her. Is it Meryl? That's the name of her character, right? Meryl.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think she's great, and I begin to appreciate her later on with other things she's done as well. In Ozark, she's great in Ozark, and then she's also in The Big C, and she's some other things too recently that I really like.
Right. I think You Can Count on Me, I think, show is a big one for her.
Okay.
Stuff like that. What's great about her performance? The notes I have here, I think she studied like Sears catalogs to get the poses of the wife, like get her poses down.
Yeah.
I like how she's dressed like a 50s housewife, because that's the kind of the attitude, like it's like you talked about before. It's you could show this to your kids. It's a very old fashioned, to the point where, and we'll talk about him later, but when Marlon's like, you look like shit, you know what I mean? Like, I was like, is he allowed to say that on TV? You know what I mean? That was the part where I was like, hold on, like, are they allowed to swear? Because it's very wholesome the way that they're treating everything. But with Meryl's character, and we'll talk a little bit more about her when we go into the themes and everything, but the way that she smiles, it's very Stepford Wivesy. It's just a very plastic, and it's a creepy smile because she, like you said, you could tell she was acting. And it's a kind of a fun comparison because it's spoilers for Stepford Wives, I guess, but they all turn out to be robots at the end. It's kind of like a sci-fi kind of twist on it, but that's what she is. She's an automaton, to the point where, she's they're coming to a head with her and Truman. That's after he's had his freak out, and they brought him back, and the cops like, we're gonna have to press charges, and like she doesn't have any recourse. She doesn't have any response other than to start advertising for Makoko. Like that's her that's her default position. So she's an automaton, like she's a robot that just has to, and so she can't deal with like all this. I don't know. like everything else, it's a very layered performance, and it's just, even though she disappears halfway through, it's still a very strong statement on
Yeah,
all
I,
that.
I love I love when she breaks and she's like, I can't work under this condition. It's unprofessional. That moment where she breaks is so great.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, absolutely. And then I think Noah Emmerich, even though he doesn't, he's frequency in other movies like that, and he's kind of a stalwart. I think as Marlon, and it's interesting too that you have the streets, like you have Lancaster Street, you have Barrymore Street, who are named after either Lionel Barrymore or Drew Barrymore. You have Lancaster, Burt Lancaster. Meryl's obviously named after Meryl Streep. Marlon's named after Marlon Brando. So it has all these characters that are named after movie stars. But even though it's not really that later performance, it's man, like the way Emmerich plays it, I think his backstory was he's gone through drug rehab, like he's been in rehab a lot, like dealing with this reality of being in the show, and there are deleted scenes where he like voices his concern for Truman and the damage that it's causing him and all this. So and even though those parts aren't in the movie, I think when you look at it from that kind of purview, it informs his performance in a way where you could tell that he actually, I think he feels for Truman, even though it's a job, you know what I mean? And he's like supportive. There's the part obviously where he keeps switching out the chocolates. He keeps moving them back and forth because, he doesn't have like a full supply because Truman keeps mixing things up and surprising everybody. So there's all these little fun moments that they have in the background. I just think even Marlon is a layered performance. It's just interesting. What do you think about him?
I think he's fine. Kind of forgettable for me, but even though I think he's there to do a job and he does his job, and I think it's fine, but it's not something that I remember or think about, So
right, not quite as strong. Right, it's more subtext and everything. And then I think I do want to mention Paul Giamatti, because when you see his face for the first time, I was like, oh man, I love this guy. Like, I know he showed up in a lot of movies. It's funny watching movies with him to start where he's not really. He's one of our finest actors now, even though he's showing up in Verizon commercials as Albert Einstein or something like that. But there was a point where he was great.
I just finished watching Billions, and so like I'm all about Paul Giamatti now.
Right. Well, he played Bob Zamuda in Man on the Moon like 2 years after Jim Carrey, right? Even though he has a small part in here, he has a line, when they're trying to drown Truman, and like he has a line where he's like, he's gonna drown and he doesn't even care, and he's like emotional. And that line, every time it gets me, I'm like, whoa. And I think that's a testament to Giamatti's level of his performance. But just to have a small part and be able to nail that one line always gets me. It got me again last night. I was like, and he's like, boost the storm. Whatever. It was like, no, I'm not going to do that. It's just a very strong moment from an actor that would become stronger as he went on in his career.
Little insight. I remember when I was editing one of my student films, we were there and edit the scenes together and be like, go to two, back to wide, and whatever.
Yeah. So we remember him from Private Parts, obviously.
Oh yeah. He's great in that movie too. Yeah, he's great.
Right. So,
who else would I mention? Is that it?
I think that's everybody. Oh, obviously, Natasha McElhone, who's.
Oh yeah.
She has a great face. She has great eyes, and so you could tell. And again, it ties in with the themes that we'll end up talking about. Is that she's the first character that shows genuine. Truman doesn't realize it at first because he still thinks he's a part of a show, right? But she's got that button that says, "How's it going to end?" She could tell that she cares about him. The way she's the first one to tell him it's all fake, and gets. And so this person that finally shows him some interest that seems, I think Truman can tell it's more sincere than how Meryl is or whatever. But, I think McKellen has the level of performance where, I could tell why someone would fall in love with her. Like, she's very strong, and she has that argument with Christoph, which I think is very crucial to the movie. And without it, the movie wouldn't quite be as strong, bringing up some of those morals. So I think even she does a great job, even though it's not quite as layered as, Harris and Linney and Carrey's performances.
Yeah. The one thing that bugged me, not her performance, but when Truman's trying to make the face from the pictures in the magazines, like it doesn't look like her. Like he did a terrible job of making it look like her. And so it's like, that's not how she looks. You take better pictures, buddy.
Right.
But also, I want to mention this too, because like I said, when I first saw it, I didn't want it to end. And the reason being is because I wanted to see what would happen next with Truman and Sylvia after he leaves the studio. But when he leaves, the whole point is you're not supposed to see what happens next, because now he finally has freedom of choice. He finally can do what he wants. He's not being controlled anymore. And so you, as the voyeur, you don't get to watch what happens now. Now his life is private. It was never private up until that point, and now it is. And I remember being like, oh, that's why I can't see what next.
Right. Well, I remember a conversation with our mutual friend Jenny, and she wanted to see it. Like, you see Sylvia run out of her apartment. Like, you can tell where she's going. You know what I mean? And so I wanted to see them meet. And I was like, I get it. But if you do that, you're negating the whole point of the movie, and you're just becoming a part of the problem. You know what I mean? It's like, once he steps through that, and I guess we should start talking about some of the themes. Like, I know we mentioned it could be like a critique of media. I know a critique on religion, stuff like that. Just to start off, how great is that image? Like, we talked about hitting the wall of the dome, and it's just the stairwell leading in a sky, right, leading to a door that's just blackness. And I think if we're looking at it from a religious point of view, like, I know in religion, no matter what religion you're part of, the kind of aesthetic is when you die, you go into the light, right? That's the aesthetic of what it is. But we're seeing the light, which is the sky. When he opens that door, it's just a void. It's a black nothing, right? And how great is that image when he steps through it? It's like this, it's the unknown. He's stepping into the unknown. It's not a bright future.
But he does climb the stairway to heaven, though. He does climb some stairs.
Right. But then he takes that step into the future, right? Where he doesn't know, his whole world isn't planned. I have the note here. This is where he begins his life. This is where, to kind of talk about the names, instead of Truman, he becomes a true man, right? He steps through that void. And he's going to have a rough life. Like, how is he going to deal with like people in real life when somebody like is nice to him? Is he going to think they're being paid to do that? Like, is he going to be able to take people sincerely? He doesn't have parents, right? I mean, what's he going to do with that? There's all these possibilities that literally it leaves the door open for you to imagine. And I just think it, like you said, it would have been a huge mistake to show any of that world, because all we're seeing is this closeted like bubble. Like, we see the viewers, which are representing us, whether in a bathtub or on a couch or stuff like that, and it's all, or in a bar. It's just very enclosed. And I think if you were to go outside of those areas, it would have, like I said, negated the whole point of the movie.
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest problems I think he has is the whole ethical dilemma that it raises with the whole, not just Big Brother, like I said before, not giving this person a choice. I mean, we don't get to choose where we're born. We're born in a certain family. We have no idea where you're going to be born. You don't know, and you don't have a choice in being here. But once you're here, you do have agency, and you do have like freedom to choose.
Right, free will.
And the whole thing going on with Christoph trying to manipulate and control every aspect of his life, even though his life is good. He's got a good life. His dad happens to him, really. Like, he's got a good job. He's got, a pretty wife. He's got, loving parents, per se, I guess, a good best friend. All this stuff is going well for him. But even with all that stuff going well, he didn't have any say in it. Like, he can make decisions based on what they present to him, but he can't choose for himself. And so, like, that's the big, moral / ethical problem, I think, that it raises, that is a big underlying theme in the movie.
And that's what I'm talking about. When you have the Sylvia and the Christoph scene where they're arguing, I think without that moment, I don't think the movie would have been as strong. It's weird to say, but they are arguing like he doesn't have free will. He's a prisoner, right? Which kind of echoes when you see that when Truman and his mom and Meryl are looking through that photo album, you see a picture of him as a child, but he's behind bars, like a safety gate. Like, that's his whole life. He's a prisoner, right? And so it's that free will. He's given the illusion of free will, but everything is tailor-made for him. I know that Marlon says, what is his real name? It's Coltrane, something like that, or I can't remember his, because Marlon is it's Louis Coltrane is his real name. But he says at the beginning, like, everything is real. It's just planned. Right. I mean, there's everything about this world is real. There's nothing fake about it. Right. But I think the idea is when you're kind of, everything is going great for you, you kind of want to break out. There's something within ourselves that we want to break out. We want to kind of mess with the system a little bit. Right. It's the line of Truman saying, he takes out the golf ball to show Marlon. He's like, Fiji, you can't go any further without coming back. he's literally dreaming about going as far as he possibly can to escape this life, because he can tell there's just something off about it. And it's the light that falls, which is like the I can't remember, it's like named after the brightest star, Sirius or whatever is the name of the light. And so it's kind of like the instigator for bringing about this change in his life. It's just you're right, it's that free will, the illusion.
Here's my thing about that light falling. Like, why hasn't that happened before? Like, why is it the first time he's noticed that? In 30-something years, that's the first time he's noticed a light falling from the rafters, you know? And that's a problem, a loose light fixture. Don't you think it would happen more often than just once in 30 years?
Yeah,
you know what I mean, like,
right.
It's surprising me that hasn't happened before.
Right.
Like,
well, maybe in front of him, like maybe that's the first time it happened, like right in front of him. Like maybe he hasn't noticed. Because it's funny watching all the background actors like going up, like they're too obvious. There are people that are walking with like these plastic smiles. There's a guy that's picking up litter. Like his job is to take the little tongs and pick up the litter and put it in a bag. But if you watch him, he's picking up air. He's stuffing it with, because that's all they're trained to do. I like that you have the the bus driver that can't start the bus, and then later like they try to get him to start the boat. He's like, I'm just the bus driver, and it's like, well, how come you don't know how to drive this? Like, well, they're actors. Like there's all this funny business that kind of feeds into it. You talked about before about it being so well planned. There's the idea that without natural sunlight, you can get diseases, right? You can get rickets. I know that these actors can leave the dome, but Truman can't. And so there's a shot, I think, at the beginning where you can see there's vitamin D at his breakfast table. So he's taking supplements. It's just all these interesting like ideas, and they've thought out a lot of this stuff, even though like you're right with the light fixtures, like, well, wouldn't that have happened before? And I think because it shows it happening, him noticing for the first time, when you start the movie, change has to happen. And that's the moment that starts him on this kind of snowball.
Right.
So I think that's the point of that.
The other question I had is when and they're trying to find him, and they get in this big old line, and they lock arms, and they walk around with flashlights trying to find Truman. Why is that their solution when there's 5,000 cameras all around, and they can just go to whatever camera they want to, and then when they do find him, it's from a camera, like a camera finds him. So it's like, what was the point of that big long line of people?
Well, it's interesting. I was thinking about that last night too. There's, like I said, there's so many things I want to talk about, even just briefly. But since you brought that up, I think the structure of the movie, I've always felt that the weakness of the movie is that for the first half of the movie, we're told everything from Truman's perspective. We know what he's going through, what he's confused by. Like he sees his father on the actor that plays his father on the street. So we're reacting to what Truman reacts to. And then it comes to everything comes to a head. Like I said, there's that argument with Meryl to blow up. Marlon comes in and she's screaming at him, this is unprofessional. And Marlon takes him out and basically says, if everybody's a part of it, I'm a part of it. Like I can't. And then all of a sudden the movie starts. It's interesting because I don't know if like without the trailer, if you would have realized at first that it was a TV show. I think it kind of gives it away because just very slowly, because it has the interviews with the Meryl actress, with the Marlon actors, stuff like that. It has interviews with Christoph that gives you a hint that it's a TV show. You get little snippets of the bar, you get little snippets of the grandmas, like I said, the garage guys, that the two guys that run the garage or man in the garage, right? But that moment where all of a sudden, Marlon's talking to Truman, and he's like, I'm a part of, like, I can't be a part of it. And all of a sudden it feeds, and you can tell it's Christoph feeding him the lines. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden all that subtext becomes text. And now it's full on, on a dime. It's like, yep, this is a TV show. It like tells you full on what's happening. Like there's no more mystery, right? Even though they kind of build to it. But what I was the flaw was from that moment, we lose track of Truman's perspective. Did you notice that? It's no longer from his perspective. It's from Christoph's perspective, right? I always thought of that as a flaw, but it's so interesting watching it last night. There's the moment where the Philip Glass track Anthem comes in, where it's Truman is like, he realized he can control and manipulate things, like he can stop the bus, and the music builds, and then they play that same song again when it's the cast and crew in that line, and so it's kind of a mirror image of Truman trying to control things. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't quite grasp the meaning. And maybe, again, this is what's great about movies that are masterpieces, is that they continue to bend and fold in your mind. And I don't know if I've thought it through all the way. I just thought it was interesting that they played that, because they played that same piece of music. I don't think that's a mistake. What do you think about that?
I can see that being on purpose. Yeah, I mean, I like that moment. I like when they do that. It is cinematic. It's fun to look at. It's not terrible. It's just funny that that's what they decide to do to try to find him. And there's other
Well,
options.
also with Christoph, like full on turning on the sun. It's like, how are they going to explain this? Like, this is over, right?
Yeah.
How they can explain this to Truman and have it go back on. I think it's interesting too, a little tidbit that I didn't pick up on. Sorry, I'm going on these little side notes, but you ever watch a show, and I'll get to The Ring. I'm going to come back to The Ring, but do you ever watch a show and it's like somebody's memories and they go into the memories like, well, how come this looks like it was filmed? Like, how come their memories look like it was filmed? There's an episode of Batman the Animated Series. It's a Mr. Freeze episode where Batman is able to figure out Mr. Freeze's backstory. And when there's this thing in the basement where Victor Freeze, he's trying to run this experiment on his wife, and Batman's watching this footage, but when you're watching, it's like, why is this footage edited? If this is security footage, why are there different angles? Like, why are there cuts? Like, it's like, what? So it takes you out of the moment because you're like, this looks like it's filmed. So, and I could give you other examples of stuff like that, but it's funny when Truman is remembering, or what we think is remembering, losing his dad, and it cuts and it shows the scenes, but it's shot and it's edited and there's angles. You know what I mean? I thought that was so funny. I'm like, this is so cool, because I've had problems with other movies and shows doing this before, but this is on purpose. It looks like a shot because it was shot, and they're just taking old footage and plugging it into this moment where Truman's just sitting on a beach, right? But there's a part where he meets his dad again, because when you see in that flashback, his dad gives him his ring, and for the rest of the movie, Truman is wearing that ring on his finger. But it turns out that ring is also a camera, right? Because it's getting him 24/7. It's always getting. But when his father shows back up in that scene with Marlon that we talked about, Truman gives the ring back to his dad, and they lose track of Truman. That's where they lose track of him. They don't have him on 24-hour surveillance like they would have had with. I thought that was an interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like
kind
that.
of touch to pick up on.
Yeah.
But what about the religiosity of the movie? Did you have any thoughts about that? Because obviously, Chris, like we talked about with Truman being true man, that's not a very subtle thing. Christoph is not not very subtle, right, with his name.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, him being the creator, he calls himself the creator.
Yeah.
No, I thought that was good. I mean, it works for the movie. It is kind of, in your face, but it's fine.
Yeah. Well, he's the creator of the show, right? He's literally manipulating everything. He's kind of walking around like kind of benevolent, I guess, but I don't know if he's really benevolent. He's walking around like he is, but I think it's there, but I don't think it's on the nose until Truman opens that door, and all of a sudden Christoph decides he's going to talk to him, and there's literally a shot of the crowds breaking. He's like, "Speak, I can hear you," and it's like, oh, they're hitting this on the head, right?
Yeah.
What I thought was great about that moment, because they're trying to maybe sell you on Christoph being the creator and being in the right, but then he says, like you said, he goes, "I am the creator of a TV show, right? Of a television show," and he talks for a little bit. And then it cuts to Sylvia watching, and she prays. She says, "Please, God." So she's not praying to Christoph anymore. Right, and then it cuts to Christoph trying to get Truman to say something. He says, "Say something, G damn it." He takes the Lord's name in vain. And so I was like, he's not God. Like, he's putting on the face of being God. I thought that was such an interesting idea. Like, they're making him this in charge kind of guy and this godlike person, but he's not. He's just as petty as everybody else.
Yeah. No, I like that. I thought that was well done. I had no issues with that, really.
Yeah, I just thought it was funny. Just very, I think I laughed in the movie theater when that happened, because like, oh my gosh, like they're hitting this on the head, obviously. If you didn't get it before, you get it now. But
yeah. Was there anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to talk about?
Well, we talked about the image of the stairs leading up to the door. We've talked about the religiosity of it. I just think we've talked about the free will versus the illusion of free will. Mm-hmm. We could go into different about surveillance and what that's like, about privacy and how we're violating laws of privacy. I mean, they don't really touch on it, but in private moments, is Truman ever? Because I have the note here, I'm like, I really wonder what Truman and Meryl, their conversations are like when they're not on camera. because he doesn't seem to really like her. Like you can tell he's annoyed with her, whether he's at the mirror and she's like, get to work. He's like, okay. Or when she keeps coming down and he's like, I'm fixing them up. Like he's obviously trying to cover things up, but you can tell he's annoyed with her a lot of the time. And she's the same way, to the point where he says, why do you want to have a baby with me?
Yeah, why'd you marry me? Yeah, all that
Yeah,
stuff.
you can't stand me. And I thought the part was funny when you see her fingers crossed in the pictures. That was great. I thought the parts, it's just interesting because what is she hired for? They don't really talk about it. She's paid to sleep with this guy, right? They're kind of aiming to have the first on-air conception. It's like, whoa. Like they kind of hint at it without, and so like we talked about with Elizabeth Perkins and like Big in that episode, there's some sexual hierarchy going on here. Like, what is her? And I think even like nothing, they're saying in her backstory, nothing was off the table for her. It's just there's some iffy stuff going on with her character that they don't really touch
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, what's to say about her? She's willing to do an acting job to sleep with someone she doesn't really know or care about. That's interesting.
Yeah. We mentioned the actors. I thought the part was really, really funny where Truman follows her to her work and the doctor like has the scalpel is like, okay, I'm going to cut. That part was really funny. It's all these little, I don't know, all these little details. I think, and like I said, we could go on for hours and hours on this. That last line of the movie where you see everybody celebrating, like I said, you see the two old women on the couch, you see the guy in the bathtub, which how long is that guy in the bathtub for? How much time did he spend in the bathtub? You got the Japanese family, you've got the, like I said, the people in the bar. I like all the advertising like we talked about they do, which is funny because Marlon drinking that what's the beer called? I've got it down here, the Penn Pavel's beer. And it's funny because in the bar, that's all everybody's drinking because they're living their life according to Truman, which is like what celebrity culture is. It's funny these days that all that, and you have the with the Kaiser chicken and the dog fancy and the Barber's ice cream, the Carlton Fine, Colonial Holmes, and that Penn's Pavel beer, it's shown up in other TV series. Did you know that?
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's shown up in The Walking Dead and Modern Family and Chicago Fire. Like they've been seen drinking that beer. It's just interesting that they're using it. It's just, I don't know. Like I said, there's all these little details that kind of fill out this world. I just think it's fantastic. And if we're coming down to that message of the movie, which all these live people are kind of mirrors of us, even though they're exaggerated and they're funny, it's like that's us. We watch from our couches, we watch from our bathtubs. It's the culture of it. It's like what Christoph says is like there's nothing fake about Truman. He's sincere, which again is interesting because the celebrity culture we have these days with the Kardashians and Paris Hilton and all these, where these fake celebrities that are just celebrities because their names are attached to more famous people than they are. You know what I mean? And it's great seeing Truman be this sincere guy and be somebody you can cheer for, to the point where you don't want him to be surveilled constantly. You want him to have his own life. And that's why that good afternoon, good evening, good night line is such a crowd pleaser, because he takes the bow. He's like, I've been the star on my own show. I'm taking my bow. I'm out. Like I've done my curtain call. Right. And that last line where it's those two garage guys and everybody's cheering and the music is going, and then it shows Christoph kind of reacting and he slunks in his seat. And then the two guys are like, hey, what else is on TV? Let's see what else is on. It's like, right. How more, it's not on the nose. It's a funny line, but it just hits that. It's that hammer, that final hammer saying, this is us. Like we're so wrapped up in this culture. Yeah. These things that we've used and these things that have changed us, like, it's Teflon, like it's on to the next thing, right? We haven't learned our lessons. I just think so this movie is so interesting, so many different facets of and different ideas that go on. Well,
speaking of the security guards, they have one of the funniest moments in the whole movie. I mean, when they're sitting there watching it and they start to get romantic, and then you cut to the guys and they're like, you don't see anything, the blows, music plays, you never show.
Yeah,
that moment always cracks me up. It's so funny.
Right.
But yeah. So is that the Truman Show in a nutshell?
That's a Truman Show. Like, I don't know. Like if you're looking at 98 movies, I think this is still my second favorite 98 movie because Saving Private Ryan came out against this too. I think Saving Private Ryan also is very changed a lot of lives.
Yeah.
So you had 98 was a very strong year. Like we won't go into a lot of others, but like having Truman Show and Saving Private Ryan out the same year is like, how lucky were we?
Yeah.
Right. And I don't talk about masterpieces that often, but if you're looking at masterpieces as movies that you argue about, movies that have ideas, and every time you watch it, it's something different. I think Truman Show qualifies as one of those movies. It's masterpiece level.
What I think is fun about it too is when you're watching the Truman Show, you're watching other people watch the Truman Show. You're watching them watch him. It's really kind of interesting to think about it that way.
Yeah, like we're not just watching from our couches. We're literally an active participant in this Truman Show. Like, so you're right. It's wow, what a movie.
Well, that'll do it for Truman Show. But Darin, let's come back and let's do our top 3 Jim Carrey movies / performances, I guess.
Okay, that sounds good. We, I know for our Christmas, for the how the Grinch Stole Christmas, we just did our Christmas staples, and so I'm glad that we didn't go into Jim Carrey then, because I think this is better kind of venue for that. So yeah.
All right, let's come back into that. We'll see you real soon.
In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Yeah.
And we're back. Darin, we might have forgotten some things. I think there's a lot to talk about this movie, so we might have forgotten a couple of things. Is there anything that you forgot to talk about?
Well, there is something called the Truman Show delusion. Have you heard about this?
No.
Where these 2 guys, Joel Gold and his brother, let's see, I want to be able to get to the right thing, be able to figure out Joel and his brother Ian, a psychiatrist and a philosophizer. They ended up finding people, I think in 2008, they coined this term called the Truman Show delusion, where they actually found people who thought their lives were part of a TV show. There are cases of like one guy who thought he was on a TV show and he had to get to the top of the Statue of Liberty to meet his girlfriend and have that be the climax of his show. There's a few other cases. There's some guy thought that 9/11 was a TV show, and so he had to travel to New York to see if the Twin Towers were still there after the tragedy kind of died down there. It's just funny because you have people, and I'm not sure if it's because of the movie, but during therapy sessions, the people that were suffering from this delusion did mention Truman Show, and I think that's why they coined it. Look that up. It's fascinating. Like all these other people that really thought they were part of a TV show, and not necessarily because of this movie, just because of that was the reality that kind of was been forced on them. So interesting. What about you? Anything you wanted to mention that we forgot?
Well, yeah, one thing that I forgot to talk about was the travel agency when he's trying to fly to Fiji and he walks in.
Oh, no. Yeah.
She walks in wearing the makeup bib and she's trying to book the flight, just typing over forever. And the wall has posters saying like, like lightning striking the airplane.
It could happen to you. And it's got posters of diseases that you can catch, and it's all pictures of water because he's got that debilitating fear of the water. And just when you see that poster of the lightning hitting that plane, I'm like, why is that in a travel agency? So funny.
It doesn't deter him. Like he's still set on going, even with all that negativity trying to get him to not go. He still wants to go.
Right. So, and I think that's just because he's kind of on, he doesn't know for sure, but he's kind of onto them. It's like this, and he's like, I'll just figure out another way, right?
You want to go? He's like, now.
Yeah. And they can't figure it out. Which ties in, if we're talking about prophetic stuff, the other thing I wanted to mention is you have that scene because he's talking with Marlon about how he wants to get away, right? And he has that covered with his mom and with Meryl and stuff like that. And then when Meryl and his mom leave, he's watching TV and there's an announcer that's like, well, when we talk about leaving home, you don't want to do that. Let's talk about a movie that we're going to show tonight. Show me the way to go home. And I think I've got what the announcer says. He says, tonight we present the endearing, much-loved classic, Show Me the Way to Go Home, a hymn of praise, the small town life where we learn that you don't have to leave home to discover what the world is all about. And that no one who's poor who has friends. And it's so funny because it's commenting on stuff that he's talking about, right? And if we're talking about prophetic stuff, I just wanted to share a story because of our smartphones and things like that. There was literally a time where me and my wife were watching TV and you have all these, you have all these ads that come up, right? And we talked about treats for our dogs. Like if we got new treats for our dogs, what would we want? Or we talked about our kids having problems with their eyes, right? And maybe should we get glasses? Should we get contact? Stuff that parents talk about. I think we even talked about skin cream for kids when they become teenagers. So we talked about this stuff and just normal things. And then I am not kidding you. Either a week or 2 weeks later, we received a package in the mail that had samples. It was like a sample package, and it had sample dog treats. It had sample like brochures for eye repair and for glasses. And then it even had samples of skin cream. We got a package with all 3 of those things that we mentioned. And we were like, what is this? And I remember just looking around the room going, are we bugged? Like looking at I just thought that was so funny watching that again last night. I was like, I remember that. I remember we got this weird mystery package where we received little samples of things that we talked about. Has anything like that happened to you?
Yeah, because we received like some sound noise canceling earphones.
Okay.
Once, and we got like also a tiny little air compressor for like balls and bike tires and even car tires.
Yeah.
And then we kept getting these like different things in the mail. And we're like, why are we getting this stuff? Because I thought maybe it was coming from like a neighbor or someone who like wanted to give us some free stuff, but we didn't pay for it. I never found any records of us buying it, but we got this stuff. And it's like, wow, what the heck? What? So I understand what you're feeling there about getting weird items in the mail.
Right. So it's not just being prophetic about reality TV. It's about being prophetic about that stuff. I remember too having that. Did we talk to a neighbor about this? Did we, and they got this for us? Just weird. Just very, and I'm sure maybe people that are listening or watching this episode, maybe they want to go ahead and comment and see if there's any other strange things that have happened to them. I'd be curious to hear about any of that.
Yeah. And then of course, like you end up talking to somebody about something you might need, and then you go to Google and you start typing something into Google, and what you were talking about populates the that happens all the time.
Right. Oh, crazy stuff.
Anyway, let's do our top 3 Jim Carrey movies / performances. I'll go first with my number 3. And I know I always do this, but I have to pick this movie, The Truman Show. It's so good. It's so fun. It's on the list because, like I said, this was his turning point. This is where he stopped being the crazy funny man and he started trying to be serious. And so this for me was like, it has to be mentioned as my number 3 because it's Jim Carrey's his turning point in his career.
Well, I'm curious to see how our lists line up again, because my 3rd is also The Truman Show.
Hey, all right.
Just because, like you said, it's his turning point. But I mentioned during the meat of our conversation that even though he's great and he has that moment at the end where it's like, whoa, like I wasn't expecting to feel that rush of emotion from him. I think there are parts where he is trying too hard. He doesn't have the mastery of his, and I think he relies maybe on his comedic stuff a little too much, where it's unmotivated. And
I can see that. I can see that.
Even though it's a strong performance, it's still not quite there. So I think that's why I have it as my 3rd. What about your 2nd?
All right, number 2. I'm going to pick Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Okay, why are you picking that one?
Well, first of all, I read the screenplay before I saw the movie, and so I fell in love with the screenplay. And I didn't know it was going to be Jim Carrey when it finally came out. And so I was like, oh, he'd be great. And so when it came out, I was just like, yep, he was the right pick. He was to play Joel. And I just love that movie. It's a great script. It's so clever and so well done. But yeah, just watching Jim Carrey really go away with this dramatic side. It's just awesome.
Yeah. And again, I'm picking Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind as my 2nd.
And we didn't talk about this, right? We didn't tell each other.
No, we never do this. We always try to. I don't know. It's so interesting. Because, like I said, it's like we're friends. Like we've grown up together, and so we kind of have the same kind of thoughts and everything. But Charlie Kaufman, I like him. But I think Eternal Sunshine was the first movie where I actually fell in love with Charlie Kaufman. I think Being John Malkovich, which is a great original screenplay, but I think I sided with the John Cusack character a little too hard. So when he loses at the end, like I didn't like that, like because and that's probably wrong because you're not supposed to side with this character. So that kind of took me out of it. And then Adaptation, which I know that you like, I think that the first 3/4 of it are really strong. And then when it starts becoming really violent and like becomes that's where that one starts to lose me. It just becomes a little too obvious for me personally. But I think with Eternal Sunshine, because it's Michael Gondry, because there's an actual, it keeps that through line all the way through. It's got, and Jim Carrey, he's able to do his comedic stuff because it's Jim Carrey. You have the parts where he's like him as a little boy and stuff like that. And Kate Winslet, I think, is interesting because Kate Winslet's usually the dramatic actress, but she's playing the kooky, crazy one. And it's Jim Carrey playing the grounded, kind of realistic one.
Mm-hmm.
And they play off each other really well. And there's a line that whole decade, Eternal Sunshine, I think is probably my favorite movie of all the naughties. Just because of like the visuals of this movie, the way that you see text disappearing from books during the scene in the bookshop, or you see like, you know, her Clementine being pulled away from the camera, or them on the ice, which is a metaphor for their relationship, or you know, the scene where Joel said, "I don't want to do this anymore." But it has a line where he's trying desperately to keep these memories. He changes his mind halfway through the experiment, right, or the operation, and he realizes that he can't. It's too late. And so there's a part where they're sitting on the beach, and Clementine sits by him, and they're talking for a little bit, and then they finally get down to brass tacks, and she's like, "Well, this is obviously going to end. What do we do?" And he just says, "We enjoy it." And it's so heartbreaking. And he, like we talked about in The Grinch, when The Grinch turns sincere and he has a heart, I mentioned in that episode that I don't buy it because Jim Carrey is still on. He's still giving 250% in that moment where he should have really dialed it down and been sincere. So that moment isn't sold. But when Joel says, "Enjoy it," there's none of that comedy stuff. It's a full-on dramatic line where you can feel that heartbreak of they're going to lose each other, but let's just enjoy. I'm getting emotional just talking about just that one line. It's so heartbreaking, and Jim Carrey sells it. It's just fantastic movie. So that's our number 2. So what about your number 1?
Well, I have to pick Man on the Moon, where he does Andy Kaufman, and I don't think it's just an impression of Andy Kaufman. I mean, we know he went full like Stanislavski. He was like method all the way, and he didn't break character the whole time on set, which I think is, you know, a little too far. But it shows that you know, that work went into it, and he is great as Andy Kaufman. I mean, I almost like his Andy Kaufman better than Andy Kaufman's Andy Kaufman.
Well, again, my number 1 is Man on the Moon. That's so strange. We just should have said just the same time what our movie, and would have been the same.
Yeah. Well, that's our first time having the same movies. That's our first,
everything the same. I think we kind of tie in before, but this is you're right. And I know people are gonna have a hard time believing that we didn't plan this at all, but that is my list. You're right. Like the method acting sometimes can go too far. I just think that you're right. He does a better Kaufman than Kaufman. Like he's so involved in this performance. It's not, I don't know. This is the first movie, like even Eternal Sunshine, I could tell it's Jim Carrey sometimes. This is the first movie that I saw with Jim Carrey, and I was like, it loses me. I'm like, that's Andy Kaufman. Like that's not Jim Carrey. We talked about the what's his name? What's the alternate persona that he has? Tony Clifton, right? We talked about that Tony Clifton voice kind of coming out in the Grinch voice. The way he's able to play that. First of all, like it's a great performance, but if we're looking at biopics, the one thing that really, every biopic is going to soften their subject, right? It's going to be kind of a like Bohemian Rhapsodying it, or they're going to make the idealized version of these people. And what Man on the Moon does, it's so brilliant, is it doesn't try to give you why he's doing this. It doesn't try to give you like, oh, because he had a bad childhood, that's why. It just gives you Andy Kaufman the way that Andy Kaufman presented himself. And so it's up to you to decide whether you're going to like his shtick or not. It doesn't make apologies for it. It doesn't make excuses for it. It doesn't give you fake backstory to kind of inform you and make those awkward, cringy moments more tolerable. It doesn't do any of that. Milos Forman gives you that Kaufman persona. And it's, like I said, it's up to you to decide whether you like that persona or not. And Jim Carrey, even though he's great and perfect, I think in that movie, he's just part of a great movie. It's not the Jim Carrey show because it's in tune with everything else. I just think it's a brilliant movie on top of a brilliant performance.
Right, I agree with that.
So,
All right, so that'll do it for this episode of NostalgiaCast, talking about the Truman Show.
Yep.
But Darin, what are we doing next time?
Okay, well, we just talked about an action movie. We talked about Speed, and even though this isn't really an action movie, I've got a friend named James Coddington, again on Twitter, who at one point calls himself that Tony Scott guy. Like, he's very big on Tony Scott. That's maybe his favorite director, tied with Spielberg, but like Tony Scott is definitely feeds into his persona online, and so Tony Scott being a fixture in the 90s, like with True Romance and Enemy of the State, all these things, of The Fan being very strong. I thought, well, let's do a Tony Scott movie. And I thought, well, James is the guy I'd want to get for that. And like you did with Jason and Braveheart, I was like, let's do Crimson Tide. Because spoilers, I think Crimson Tide is Tony Scott's strongest, most solid film. And so that's one of the movies that was on my list for the season. I want to talk about that. And then getting to know James as that Tony Scott guy, I was like, that's the guy for it. Let's bring him on. Let's talk about Crimson Tide. Let's talk Gene Hackman. Let's talk Denzel Washington and maybe career best performances. Let's talk about all that next time.
All right, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
All right, then, for NostalgiaCast, I am Johnny Craddock.
And I'm Darin Lundberg.
And in case we don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
We'll see you guys.